My mother stood in front of 40 guests at my 30th birthday dinner, raised a glass, and announced that I had been adopted for tax benefits. What she didn't know was that inside my purse was a secret that would make her run from her own party before dessert was served. How does a birthday turn into a public execution? And how does a daughter survive it without breaking? My name is Myra Anderson. I'm 30 years old, and I'm an architect in Boston. I spend my days designing spaces where people feel safe, where light falls exactly where it should, where foundations are measured, reinforced, and tested before anyone steps inside. I've always believed stability is something you build. But the night of my birthday, I learned that sometimes the strongest foundation you have is the truth you've been denied. I'm telling you this story because for 30 years, I thought I understood my place in my family. I thought I knew why I felt slightly out of frame in every photograph, why my name always came second, why affection felt like something I had to earn. I believed the story I'd been given, until my mother decided to rewrite it publicly. The restaurant was called The Sterling. 5-star, floor-to-ceiling windows, crystal chandeliers that scattered light across white tablecloths like 1,000 tiny spotlights. Outside, Boston glittered against the harbor. Inside, 40 guests, family, friends, distant relatives. A few of my coworkers Patricia insisted I invite, sat arranged in a perfect U shape. At the center was a single chair wrapped in silver ribbon. Min. It should have felt like a celebration. Instead, it felt like a stage. When my mother first announced the party in the family group chat, I almost didn't believe it. My parents had never thrown me a birthday like this before. My 18th birthday had been a quiet dinner at home, a grocery store cake, and a card that said happy birthday, with nothing written inside. That same year, my sister Jenna had a pool party with a DJ and a professional photographer. So when Patricia texted, "Big news! We're celebrating Myra in style this year," I read it 3 times. Why now? A small, hopeful part of me whispered that maybe she was trying. Maybe turning 30 meant I'd finally crossed some invisible line into being worthy of effort. But there was another part of me quieter, colder, that had learned not to trust sudden warmth. That second voice was the reason I slipped a cream-colored envelope into my purse before leaving my apartment that night. I hadn't planned to bring it. I told myself I was being dramatic, paranoid even. But 2 weeks earlier, I'd received a phone call from a man named Theodore Whitman, my grandmother's attorney. And that call had cracked something open. "Your grandmother left documents specifically for you," he'd said. "She instructed that no one else in your family be informed. No one else." My grandmother, Grace Anderson, had passed away 6 months earlier. She was the only person in my family who ever made me feel fully seen. She'd squeeze my hand under the table when Patricia made subtle remarks about how fortunate I was. She'd slip me extra dessert and wink like we shared a secret. Once, when I was 14 and crying in her garden after one of my mother's colder-than-usual comments, she brushed dirt off her hands and said, "You belong here more than you know, sweetheart. One day you'll understand." I never understood what she meant. Until that envelope, inside was a certified copy of her will, a handwritten letter, and a smaller sealed packet labeled, "Only open when absolutely necessary." I didn't open the smaller one. Not yet. I told myself I didn't need to. But I brought it to dinner anyway. Because something about this celebration didn't feel right. When I walked into the Sterling that night, Patricia greeted me with air kisses and a smile too wide to be sincere. "You deserve this, sweetheart," she said. She never called me sweetheart. My father, Richard, gave me a stiff hug and avoided eye contact. Jenna stood in the corner, already recording on her phone like this was content waiting to happen. The room smelled like expensive perfume and polished wood. Soft jazz drifted through the speakers. Champagne glasses clinked. I smiled, thanked people for coming, and tried to ignore the tightness in my chest. Dinner was pleasant enough, at first: salmon, asparagus, polite laughter. I almost relaxed. Almost believed I'd misjudged everything. Then, Patricia stood. She smoothed her navy dress, walked to the small podium near the window, and tapped the microphone twice. The room quieted instantly. "Thank you all for coming," she began, her voice warm and theatrical. "We're here to celebrate someone very special." Applause. I forced a smile. 30 years, she continued. It feels like yesterday she came into our lives. Something in her tone shifted, just slightly. A thin edge beneath the sweetness. I felt it before I understood it. "We've supported her through school, through her career, through everything," Patricia said. "We've loved her like she was one of us." Like, my fingers tightened around my napkin under the table. "And I think," she paused dramatically, scanning the room, "it's time we were honest." A ripple of murmurs. I glanced at my father. He was staring at his plate. Jenna's phone was angled perfectly at my face. "Myra isn't our biological daughter," Patricia announced. The words dropped like a stone into water. The shock rippled outward. Heads turned. Conversations died mid-breath. "She's adopted," Patricia said, smiling as if she were revealing a charming family anecdote. "We took her in when she was 2. I sat perfectly still. "And do you know why?" she asked, her voice almost playful. A few people shifted in their seats. "Tax benefits?" she said, laughing lightly. "The government had incentives. It just made financial sense." Jenna burst out laughing. Sharp, delighted. Someone gasped. Someone else whispered, "Oh my God." 40 pairs of eyes locked onto me. My ears rang. My vision blurred at the edges. I felt 14 again. Small. Exposed. Out of place. "She was never really part of this family," Patricia continued. "We did what we thought was best at the time." Best. For who? She turned to me with exaggerated sympathy. "I hope this doesn't upset you, sweetheart, but you deserve the truth." This was the part she'd rehearsed. The part where I would cry. Where I would excuse myself. Where the story would end with me leaving in humiliation. She expected collapse. Instead, I felt something else. The edge of the envelope pressed against my thigh inside my purse. My grandmother's words echoed in my mind. "Be brave." I didn't cry. I didn't run. I stood up slowly, smoothing my dress, letting the silence stretch until it became uncomfortable. Patricia's smile flickered. "Thank you," I said calmly, "for finally telling everyone your version of the truth." A few guests exchanged glances. "Because now," I continued, reaching into my purse, "it's my turn." And as my fingers closed around the envelope sealed with my grandmother's initials, I realized something powerful. For the first time in 30 years, I wasn't the one on trial. I was the one holding the evidence. The truth is, the night of my birthday didn't begin at the Sterling. It began a month earlier, in the quiet hum of my office, under fluorescent lights that suddenly felt too bright. It was a Thursday night, almost 8 o'clock. Most of the firm had gone home. I was still at my desk at Harrison and Cole Architecture, reviewing blueprints for a renovation project I'd been obsessing over for weeks. I've always stayed late. It's a habit I developed young. Work harder, stay longer, be better than expected. If you do enough, maybe you'll finally feel secure. My phone buzzed against the desk, rattling softly against a metal ruler. Unknown number. Boston area code. Normally, I ignore those calls. Spam, telemarketers, wrong numbers. But something I can't explain even now, made me pick it up. "Hello? Miss Anderson?" The voice was male, measured, professional. "My name is Theodore Whitman. I was your grandmother's attorney." My spine straightened instantly. My grandmother, Grace Anderson, had passed away 6 months earlier. We'd had the funeral, the polite condolences, the reading of the will in a dark office with stiff chairs and folded hands. Everything had seemed settled. Patricia had left that meeting satisfied. Jenna had scrolled through her phone the entire time. I had left feeling hollow. So why was her lawyer calling me now? "There's a matter I need to discuss with you," he continued. "In person. It concerns documents your grandmother left specifically for you." "Specifically for me?" "I don't understand," I said. "The estate was already handled." "This is separate," he replied. Then he paused in a way that made my pulse quicken. "Your grandmother left explicit instructions that no one else in your family should be informed about this conversation." No one else. The air in my office felt thinner. "She was very clear," he added. "I am to meet with you privately." A strange mix of emotions rose in me: confusion, curiosity, and something dangerously close to hope. Grandma Grace had always loved me differently, softer, steadier. When Patricia made her subtle digs about how fortunate I was, Grandma would squeeze my hand under the table. When Jenna rolled her eyes at something I said, Grandma would redirect the conversation back to me like I mattered. Once, years ago, I'd found her in the garden and confessed that I sometimes felt like I didn't belong. She'd brushed dirt from her gloves and looked at me in a way that felt almost urgent. "You belong here more than you know, sweetheart," she'd whispered. "One day you'll understand." At the time, I thought it was comfort. Now it sounded like preparation. "When can we meet?" I asked. "Tomorrow morning, 9 o'clock. I'll text you the address." After we hung up, I didn't move for a long time. The city outside my office window glowed against the darkening sky, headlights streaking along the streets below. My computer screen dimmed from inactivity. The project in front of me suddenly felt irrelevant. Grandma Grace had left something for me, something secret, and she had made sure no one else knew. My phone buzzed again, jolting me. The family group chat. "Patricia. Big news. We're throwing Myra a 30th birthday dinner at the Sterling. Saturday the 15th, 7 p.m. Everyone's invited." I stared at the message, rereading it slowly. The Sterling was one of Boston's most exclusive restaurants. Reservations there required connections, deposits, intention. My parents had never thrown me anything remotely close to that. My 18th birthday had been a quiet dinner at home, a cake from the grocery store, and a blank card. Meanwhile, Jenna's 15th had featured a pool party, a DJ, and professionally edited photos. So why now? "Wow, thank you so much. I'm surprised," I typed back carefully. "You deserve it, sweetheart," Patricia replied almost instantly. Sweetheart. The word looked foreign next to her name. I set my phone down slowly. Tomorrow morning I would meet my grandmother's attorney. And somehow, instinctively, I knew I needed to understand whatever she'd left me before walking into any celebration Patricia organized. The next morning, Theodore Whitman's office felt like stepping into another era. Dark wood paneling, leather chairs, law books lining the walls like silent witnesses. He stood to greet me, silver hair, wire-rimmed glasses, composed and deliberate. "Miss Anderson," he said, shaking my hand firmly, "please, have a seat." He placed a large cream-colored envelope on the desk between us. It was sealed with wax, stamped with my grandmother's initials, G.A. "Your grandmother prepared this 5 years ago," he explained. "She was in excellent health at the time. 3 independent attorneys witnessed her signing. The documents were recorded and stored properly." "Why wasn't this part of the original will reading?" I asked. "Because she specifically instructed that this envelope be delivered to you alone." After her passing, I reached toward it carefully. The paper felt heavier than it should have. "What's inside?" "A certified copy of her will, a personal letter addressed to you, and a smaller sealed packet. She instructed that you not open the smaller packet unless absolutely necessary." "Absolutely necessary?" I repeated. He nodded. "She said you would know when that time came." I broke the wax seal slowly. The will came first. I skimmed through the formal language until I saw my name. "I hereby bequeath the Anderson estate, including all property and contents therein, to my granddaughter, Myra Anderson." My breath caught. The Anderson estate wasn't just a house. It was the house. The place Patricia had treated like her kingdom for 2 decades. The home where holidays were staged like magazine spreads. The property she maintained meticulously, as if ownership were inevitable. "This can't be right," I whispered. "It is entirely legal," Whitman replied calmly. "Your grandmother was clear in her intent." "But why me?" He slid the handwritten letter toward me. "Perhaps she answers that herself." I didn't read it there. I couldn't. My mind was already racing ahead to Patricia, to Jenna, to the dinner invitation sitting in my phone. "The will becomes public in 2 weeks," Whitman added quietly. "Your grandmother wanted to give you time to prepare." "For what?" His expression shifted just slightly. "For the reaction." I left his office carrying the envelope like it contained something fragile and volatile at the same time. That night, in my small, one-bedroom apartment, I finally opened the letter. I sat at my kitchen table under a single lamp, the rest of the apartment dark. Her handwriting was elegant and unmistakable. "My dearest Myra," it began. "If you're reading this, I am gone, and there are things I was not brave enough to say while I was alive." Tears blurred the ink as I read on. She wrote that she loved me from the moment she held me, that she regretted not protecting me more fiercely, that she had watched Patricia diminish me over the years and carried guilt for staying quiet too often. Then came the sentence that made my heart stop. "You are not a stranger adopted by chance. You are my blood, my real blood." I read it again and again. "You belong to this family more deeply than anyone has told you." My hands trembled. I looked at the smaller sealed packet resting on the table beside the letter. "Only open when absolutely necessary." I didn't open it. Not yet. Instead, I locked it inside my safe and sat there long after midnight, staring at nothing. 2 weeks until the will became public. 1 week until my birthday dinner. Something inside me shifted that night. For the first time in my life, I wondered if the story I'd been given about myself, about being lucky, about being taken in, about being an outsider, wasn't the full truth. And if that was true, then what else had I been living inside without knowing? Across town, I had no idea what Patricia knew yet. I didn't know she would soon find out about the will. I didn't know she would start planning something of her own. All I knew was this. I had been handed information powerful enough to change everything. And whether I wanted to or not, the stage was already being built. After I left Mr. Whitman's office, I didn't drive home right away. I sat in my car with the envelope resting on the passenger seat like it was another person, silent, heavy, waiting. The late morning sun streamed through the windshield, too bright, too normal for a day that suddenly didn't feel normal at all. I remember gripping the steering wheel and staring at the wax seal I had already broken, trying to steady my breathing. The Anderson estate. Those words replayed in my head on a loop. The house wasn't just property, it was history. It was where every Thanksgiving was held, where Patricia arranged floral centerpieces like she was curating a magazine spread, where Jenna took photos in the grand staircase mirror as if the entire space existed for her reflection. It was the place where I learned to make myself smaller so I wouldn't disrupt the illusion. And now, on paper legally, formally, that house belonged to me. I finally drove home in a fog. My apartment felt smaller than usual when I walked in, like the walls had shifted overnight. I set the envelope down on my kitchen table, made tea I didn't drink, and stared at the letter again. "You are my blood, my real blood." That sentence had split my identity in two. For 30 years, adopted had been a quiet shadow over everything. It wasn't spoken often, but it was always implied. When family members introduced us, there was always a slight hesitation before my name. When someone would say, "You don't look like your sister," Patricia would laugh lightly and say, "Well, she's adopted," as if it were a charming anecdote instead of a permanent footnote. I grew up believing adoption meant gratitude. Gratitude meant silence. Silence meant survival. But my grandmother's words suggested something else entirely. Blood. I ran my fingers over the smaller sealed packet, resting beside the letter. It was thicker than I expected, edges firm, my grandmother's handwriting clear across the front. Only open when absolutely necessary. What counted as necessary? Public humiliation? Legal threats? Being disowned? Or was it something quieter, like the moment you realize your entire story has been miswritten? I wanted to tear it open immediately. Every instinct in me screamed for answers. But another part of me, stronger, steadier, told me to wait. Grandma Grace had always been careful, deliberate. She didn't dramatize. If she said absolutely necessary, she meant it. So instead of opening it, I did something I hadn't done in years. I let myself remember. I remembered being 6 years old at the estate's dining table, while Patricia corrected how I held my fork. "We do things properly in this family," she'd said. Not unkindly, but not warmly either. I remembered being 10 and overhearing a relative whisper, "It's nice they took her in." I remembered being 13 and asking my father what my biological parents were like, He'd hesitated too long before answering. It's complicated. Complicated. That word had shaped my childhood. Grandma Grace, though, had never treated me like something complicated. When I stayed over at the estate during school breaks, she'd let me sit in her room while she brushed her hair and told me stories about her youth. She'd ask about my drawings, my ideas, my dreams. She'd tell me I had Marcus's eyes sometimes, but I never knew who Marcus was. When I asked once, she'd gone quiet and said, "One day." That was her way. She planted seeds instead of answers. Now I understood that this envelope was one of those seeds finally breaking through the soil. That evening, my phone buzzed again. Family group chat. Patricia had posted a screenshot of the restaurant reservation confirmation, complete with a message. Everything is set for Myra's big night. Can't wait to celebrate her properly this time. Properly this time. Jenna responded with heart emojis. A few extended family members chimed in with excitement. My father simply wrote, "Looking forward to it. Looking forward to it." The words unsettled me. I stared at the screen, then at the envelope, then back at the screen. 2 weeks until the will became public. 7 days until my birthday. And something in my gut told me those two timelines were not unrelated. The next morning, I called in sick to work not because I was ill, but because I couldn't focus on structural loads and zoning regulations when my own foundation was shifting. I drove to the estate without telling anyone. I parked down the street, not ready to walk up the driveway just yet. From the outside, nothing had changed. The brick facade gleamed. The gardens were trimmed precisely. Patricia's favorite hydrangeas were in bloom. It looked like stability, permanence. But I knew something the house didn't. In less than 2 weeks, its ownership would be publicly reassigned. I didn't go inside. I couldn't. Instead, I sat there and imagined how Patricia would react. Shock first, then denial, then anger. Patricia didn't lose control well. Control was her oxygen. And then I wondered something I hadn't considered before. Did she already know? The will had been prepared 5 years ago. Had my grandmother hinted at it? Had there been tension I hadn't noticed? Had Patricia suspected something was coming? I drove home with more questions than answers. That night, I invited my friend Lucas over. He'd known me long enough to read my face without explanation. We sat on my couch, the envelope between us on the coffee table. "Okay," he said gently. "Tell me everything." So I did. The call, the meeting, the will, the letter. I didn't tell him the exact words about blood. Not yet. I wasn't ready to speak them out loud. Saying it would make it real, in a way I wasn't prepared for. He listened quietly, jaw tightening as I described Patricia's sudden generosity about the birthday dinner. "That's not random," he said finally. "I know. She finds out she's not inheriting the estate in 2 weeks, and suddenly she throws you a public celebration?" He shook his head slowly. "Myra, that's not a coincidence." I hated how logical that sounded. "You think she knows already?" "If she doesn't, she suspects," Lucas replied. "And if she suspects, she's planning." Planning. The word settled heavily. "What would she plan?" I asked. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he looked at the envelope. "Whatever she's planning," he said carefully, "you need to walk into that dinner prepared." "I don't want this to be a war," I admitted. "Maybe it already is." After he left, I sat alone in the quiet of my apartment, staring at the sealed packet again. Absolutely necessary. I realized something then. My grandmother hadn't just left me property. She'd left me protection. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like the vulnerable one in the family story. I felt like the person holding a missing piece of it. I carefully placed the will, the letter, and the sealed packet back into the envelope. Then, I slid it into my safe. But before closing the door, I hesitated. Something told me I wouldn't be able to leave it behind on my birthday. Not after the way Patricia's tone had shifted. Not after the way my father had typed, "Looking forward to it." I locked the safe and stood there in the dim light, my reflection faintly visible in the metal surface. For 30 years, I had tried to earn belonging. Now, I was beginning to suspect that belonging had been mine all along. And if Patricia had any intention of rewriting my place in front of 40 people, I wouldn't walk into that room empty-handed. The week before my birthday felt like living inside a glass house. Everything looked normal from the outside, but underneath, hairline fractures were spreading through the walls. Patricia's messages in the family group chat became more frequent, more curated updates about menu tastings, seating arrangements, guest confirmations. She even sent a photo of the custom cake she had ordered, a three-tiered ivory creation with delicate sugar flowers. "Only the best for our girl," she wrote, followed by a heart. Dang, our girl. The words made my stomach tighten. If you've ever grown up in a family where affection is strategic, you learn to read tone the way other people read weather forecasts. You notice pressure shifts before the storm hits, and Patricia's kindness had pressure behind it. At work, I moved through meetings and project deadlines like I was watching myself from a distance. My coworkers chatted about weekend plans. Lucas gave me a look across the conference table that said, "You okay?" I nodded every time, but inside, something was building. 3 days before the party, I did something I rarely do. I went shopping for myself. Not because I wanted to impress anyone, but because I wanted armor. Nordstrom was bright and polished, full of mirrors that reflected versions of myself I didn't always recognize. I tried on a navy dress first, safe, elegant, forgettable, then a black one, too severe. Finally, I stepped into an emerald silk dress that caught the light differently. It didn't shout, it didn't apologize either. "The emerald one," a voice behind me said. "That's the one." I turned and saw Lucas, leaning casually against the rack, like he hadn't just followed me across town. "Are you stalking me?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. "Saw you through the window," he said with a grin. Then his expression softened. "Talk to me." So I did. About the sealed packet I still hadn't opened. About the strange way Patricia had suddenly elevated my birthday to an event worthy of crystal chandeliers. Lucas listened without interrupting, hands in his pockets, eyes steady. "You've spent your whole life walking into rooms trying to prove you belong," he said finally. "If this is another trap, don't go in unarmed." "It's my birthday," I said quietly. "I don't want to turn it into a confrontation." "You might not get to choose that," he replied, "but you can choose whether you're prepared." The word stayed with me. Prepared. That night, I laid everything out on my bed. The certified will, Grandma Grace's letter, the smaller sealed packet with its ominous instruction, "Only open when absolutely necessary." I studied it like it might whisper guidance if I stared long enough. I still didn't open it. But I did something else. I placed all of it into a slim cream envelope, the same one Mr. Whitman had handed me. Then I tested my new clutch. Small, structured. Just enough room for my phone, lipstick, and the truth. I slid the envelope inside. Just in case. Across town, I didn't know what conversations were unfolding in the Anderson estate. I didn't know that Patricia had already learned about the will through quiet channels, that whispers travel faster in certain social circles than official announcements do. But I would later piece it together, through Aunt Helen, through overheard comments, through the wreckage left behind. Patricia had found out the estate wasn't hers. And for someone who had decorated every room of that house as if ownership were inevitable, that knowledge wasn't just disappointing. It was destabilizing. Control had always been her currency. The estate was her crown. And if the crown was being handed to me, she wasn't going to step aside gracefully. She was going to perform. The morning of my birthday, I woke up earlier than usual. The city outside my window felt unusually still. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to my own breathing, feeling that strange blend of dread and clarity that sometimes precedes a life-altering moment. I thought about calling Patricia, about asking her directly if there was something she wanted to say before the dinner. But I knew better. Patricia never revealed her strategy ahead of time. She preferred spectacle. Instead, I brewed coffee and sat at my kitchen table, rereading Grandma Grace's letter one more time. "You are stronger than they have ever let you believe." Those words felt less like comfort now, and more like instruction. By late afternoon, my phone buzzed again. "Patricia, can't wait to celebrate you tonight. So proud of the woman you've become. So proud." Pride implies ownership. I typed back a simple, "Thank you." Jenna sent a message next. Make sure you're on time. Photographer starts at 7:15. Photographer. Of course there was one. I stared at that message longer than I should have. A photographer meant documentation. Documentation meant narrative control. Patricia loved curated stories, and if tonight was being recorded, it wasn't just for memories. It was for positioning. Around 5, I began getting ready. I showered slowly, letting the steam settle my nerves. I applied makeup carefully, but lightly. I wasn't dressing to impress anyone. I was dressing to feel steady. When I slipped into the emerald dress, I paused in front of the mirror. I didn't look small. That mattered more than I expected. Before leaving, I opened my safe and retrieved the envelope. My fingers lingered on the smaller sealed packet for a moment. Absolutely necessary. I placed everything back inside and locked the safe again. Then I slid the envelope into my clutch and closed it with a soft click. It felt heavier than it should have. As I rode in the car toward the Sterling, Boston's skyline reflecting off the windows, I tried to imagine the best-case scenario. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe this really was just a party. Maybe Patricia's sudden warmth was genuine. But my instincts, sharpened by years of subtle humiliation, told me otherwise. Patricia didn't invest that much money without expecting a return. And if tonight was her attempt to control the narrative before the will became public, then she would need an audience. 40 guests, a photographer, a microphone. The pieces were assembling too neatly. When the car pulled up in front of the restaurant, I took one slow breath before stepping out. The air was crisp, the building elegant and imposing. Through the windows, I could already see chandeliers glowing against white tablecloths. It looked like a celebration. It felt like a stage. As I walked toward the entrance, clutch in hand, I realized something had shifted inside me over the past week. I wasn't walking in blind anymore. I wasn't walking in grateful and apologetic and eager to please. I was walking in informed. And if Patricia intended to humiliate me publicly, to remind me of my place before the estate announcement forced her hand, I would not be the version of myself she expected. I wouldn't shrink. I wouldn't cry. I wouldn't disappear. Because this time, if a performance was planned, I had a script of my own. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid of the spotlight. The Sterling was even more dazzling from the inside than it had appeared through the windows. Crystal chandeliers cascaded from the ceiling like frozen waterfalls of light, scattering reflections across polished marble floors. A long U-shaped banquet table dominated the private dining room, dressed in white linen so crisp it looked untouched by human hands. At the center of it all sat a single chair wrapped in silver ribbon. Mine. For a brief second, I let myself imagine this was genuine. That maybe, just maybe, this was Patricia's way of turning a corner. That turning 30 meant something had softened in her. But the longer I stood there, the more the room felt curated, not warm. Arranged, not welcoming. "Birthday girl." Patricia's voice cut through the low hum of conversation. She swept toward me in a navy dress that matched the seriousness of her expression more than the joy of the occasion. Her smile was wide, her lipstick perfect. She kissed my cheek lightly and held me at arm's length, studying me like I was an exhibit she had prepared. "You look beautiful," she said loudly enough for nearby guests to hear. "Thank you," I replied evenly. My father, Richard, approached next. He offered a quick hug, brief, careful, almost apologetic. His eyes didn't quite meet mine. "Happy birthday," he murmured, already glancing toward Patricia as if checking whether he'd performed correctly. Jenna stood near the window, phone raised, recording. She tilted her head slightly when she saw me, lips curved in a smile that felt rehearsed. "Make sure you get her reaction later," she whispered to someone beside her, not quietly enough. Reaction. The word settled in my stomach like a stone. Then I felt arms wrap around me, warm, firm, real. Aunt Helen. She had flown in from California, something she almost never did for family events anymore. She held me longer than necessary, her hand pressing gently against my back. "Whatever happens tonight," she whispered near my ear, "remember who you are." The sentence was quiet, but it echoed loudly. "What do you mean?" I asked softly. Before she could answer, a server called everyone to their seats. I took my place in the ribbon-wrapped chair, smoothing my emerald dress, clutch resting against my thigh. The envelope inside felt like a pulse. Dinner began smoothly enough. Salmon glazed with something citrus and delicate, asparagus arranged precisely, wine poured generously. Conversation floated around me, work updates, travel stories, harmless gossip. Laughter rose and fell in practiced waves. For a moment, I almost believed I had been wrong. Almost believed the week of tension had been my imagination. Then Patricia stood. She didn't rush. She adjusted her napkin, smoothed her dress, and walked to the small podium near the window like someone accustomed to commanding attention. She tapped the microphone twice. The room quieted instantly. "Thank you all for being here tonight," she began, voice warm and polished. "We're celebrating someone very special. Our Myra is turning 30. Applause followed. A few cheers. Jenna angled her phone directly at my face. 30 years, Patricia continued, smiling toward me. It feels like yesterday she came into our lives. There it was again, that phrasing. Came into our lives. I kept my expression neutral. We've supported her through school, through her career, through everything, Patricia said. We've loved her like she was one of us. Like a subtle shift, almost invisible, but unmistakable. I felt the air change. Conversations stilled. Even the servers paused near the walls. "I've been thinking lately about honesty," Patricia went on, clasping her hands lightly in front of her. "And I believe birthdays are the perfect time for truth." My pulse quickened. "Don't!" Aunt Helen's voice cut softly from across the table. Patricia ignored her. "Myra isn't our biological daughter," she announced. The words landed like a glass, shattering against marble. Gasps rippled around the table. Forks hovered midair. 40 sets of eyes turned toward me. "She's adopted," Patricia continued, tone almost amused. "We took her in when she was 2 years old." I stared straight ahead, refusing to let my face crumble. "And do you know why?" Patricia paused for dramatic effect, scanning the room. "Tax benefits." A sharp laugh burst from Jenna before she could stop herself. Someone coughed uncomfortably. A woman near the end of the table whispered something to her husband. My father kept his gaze locked on his plate. The chandelier light felt suddenly harsher, exposing. "We thought it would be a practical decision," Patricia added lightly. "The government had programs back then. It just made sense financially." Financially. The words scraped against something raw inside me. "She was never really part of this family," Patricia continued, spreading her hands. "We tried our best, of course, but honesty matters." My ears rang. My hands felt distant, detached from the rest of me. This was the reaction. She wanted the shock, the humiliation, the shrinking. For 30 years, I had rehearsed disappearing. I knew how to fold myself inward. I knew how to smile politely while someone chipped away at my worth. But tonight, something was different. Tonight, I wasn't walking in blind. I felt the edge of the envelope against my thigh. Grandma Grace's handwriting flashed in my memory. "Be brave, my darling girl." Patricia turned to me with exaggerated sympathy. "I hope this doesn't upset you, sweetheart, but after 30 years of pretending, I thought you deserved the truth." Pretending. That word snapped something into place. I could see it now, the stage, the audience, the camera, the photographer, waiting discreetly near the wall. This wasn't honesty. It was positioning, a narrative crafted to frame me as grateful, as indebted, as temporary. Temporary people don't inherit estates. Temporary people don't contest wills. Temporary people disappear quietly. Patricia expected tears, maybe even an apology. Instead, I stood, slowly, deliberately. The scraping of my chair against the marble floor echoed louder than her speech had. I didn't speak immediately. I let the silence stretch, let the weight of 40 pairs of eyes settle. Patricia's smile faltered. "Thank you," I said calmly, my voice steadier than I felt, "for sharing your version of the truth." A ripple of confusion passed through the room. "Myra," Patricia began. "Oh, I'm not upset," I interrupted gently. "In fact, I think tonight is the perfect time for honesty." Jenna lowered her phone slightly. My father finally looked up. I reached for my clutch. Patricia's eyes flickered toward it. There it was. Fear. You wanted to do this publicly, I continued evenly. With everyone who matters watching. The guests shifted in their seats, sensing something unfolding. Let's do it properly, I said. My fingers closed around the cream-colored envelope inside my purse. For the first time in my life, I wasn't reacting to the story being told about me. I was about to tell my own. And Patricia, standing at the podium she had claimed so confidently only minutes earlier, had no idea that the performance she orchestrated was about to collapse. Because she had tried to humiliate me with the truth. But she didn't realize. She didn't know all of it. I could feel every heartbeat in my fingertips as I reached into my clutch and pulled out the cream-colored envelope. The wax seal had already been broken days earlier, but the paper still carried the weight of intention. Grandma Grace's initials, G.A., caught the chandelier light as I held it up. The room didn't just go quiet, it tightened. Patricia took a small step toward me, her smile thinning. Myra, this really isn't the time. Oh, I said softly, almost kindly. It's exactly the time. A few guests shifted uncomfortably. The photographer lowered his camera slightly, uncertain. Jenna's phone wavered. My father's chair creaked as he sat up straighter for the first time all evening. You made tonight about truth, I continued, keeping my voice calm and steady. So let's talk about all of it. I slid the certified copy of the will from the envelope and held it in front of me. My hands trembled at first, but the tremor passed quickly. It's amazing how steady you can become when you realize you have nothing left to lose. 2 weeks ago, I began. I received a call from Theodore Whitman, Grandma Grace's attorney. Patricia went still, not confused, not surprised. Still. He asked to meet with me privately, I said, because my grandmother left documents specifically for me. Documents she instructed be delivered without informing anyone else in the family. A murmur rippled around the table. That's absurd, Patricia said sharply, but the sharpness felt defensive rather than dismissive. Is it? I asked quietly. I unfolded the will and let the paper straighten in my hands. This is a certified copy of her final will and testament, I said clearly. Prepared 5 years ago. Witnessed by 3 independent attorneys. Recorded properly. Patricia's composure began to fracture. Estate matters are not appropriate dinner conversation. You made my existence dinner conversation, I replied evenly. So, I think we're past worrying about appropriateness. A couple at the far end of the table exchanged glances. Someone coughed into their napkin. I drew a breath and read the line that had changed everything. I hereby bequeath the Anderson estate, including all property and contents therein, to my granddaughter, Myra Anderson. The reaction was immediate. Not loud at first, but sharp, like the intake of breath before a storm. Whispers layered over one another. That can't be right. The estate? She left it to her? Patricia's face drained of color. That's impossible, she said, but her voice lacked conviction. It's legal, I said. It's documented, and it becomes public in 2 weeks. I saw something flicker in her eyes then. Calculation, fear, recognition. This wasn't news to her. Or, at least, it wasn't entirely. She had known something was coming. That's why tonight had been orchestrated. That's why there was a microphone and a photographer and 40 witnesses. She hadn't planned a celebration. She had planned containment. Myra, she said more quietly now, stepping down from the podium. We can discuss this privately. I almost laughed, not out of cruelty, but disbelief. Privately? I echoed. Like you privately decided to tell 40 people I was adopted for tax benefits? Her jaw tightened. I turned slightly so the room could see the document in my hand. This house, the one you've decorated, hosted in, curated for 20 years, it doesn't belong to you. A low hum of shock moved across the table. My father finally stood. Slowly, deliberately. He looked older than he had at the beginning of dinner. Pat, he said, his voice rough. Maybe we should let her finish. The room froze. For 30 years, my father had chosen silence. He had perfected it. Silence at Christmas. Silence at birthdays. Silence whenever Patricia's words cut just a little too deep. But tonight, something in him shifted. Patricia turned toward him, incredulous. Richard, This is ridiculous. I'm tired, he said quietly. I've been tired for a very long time. That sentence landed harder than anything else had. Because it wasn't about property. It was about history. I held the will steady and met Patricia's eyes. You tried to humiliate me before this became public, I said calmly. You thought if you framed me as an outsider first, it would be easier to challenge the will later. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. You thought if I was embarrassed enough, I continued, I would step aside quietly. The photographer slowly lowered his camera completely now. The power in the room had shifted. It was subtle but undeniable. Patricia was no longer directing the narrative. She was reacting to it. And here's the part you didn't expect, I said, my voice softening slightly, not with weakness but with control. The estate isn't even the most important thing my grandmother left me. A visible tremor passed through Patricia's shoulders. There's more? Someone whispered. Yes, I said simply. I reached back into the envelope and removed Grandma Grace's handwritten letter. The paper was thinner than the will, more fragile, but it carried more weight. My grandmother wrote this for me, I said. She said there were things she wasn't brave enough to tell me while she was alive. Patricia's breathing quickened. I could see it from where I stood. I didn't read the whole letter. I didn't need to. I chose the lines that mattered. You are not a stranger adopted by chance, I read slowly. You are my blood, my real blood. The silence that followed was heavier than the whispers had been. My father closed his eyes briefly. Patricia's hands gripped the edge of the podium behind her. She knew, I continued gently, that one day, someone might try to make me feel like I didn't belong. I let the words hang in the air. And she wanted me to know the truth before that happened. I didn't go further, not yet. The smaller sealed packet still rested inside the envelope, unopened. I could feel its presence like a second pulse. But even without it, the balance had changed. The guests who had watched me moments earlier with pity or curiosity were now looking at Patricia with something else entirely uncertainty. Doubt. I lowered the document slightly. You wanted to make a spectacle, I said quietly. You wanted witnesses. I gestured gently toward the room. Well, you have them. Patricia's composure cracked fully then. Not dramatically, not with shouting, but with the kind of collapse that happens internally when control slips through your fingers. This isn't over, she said through clenched teeth. No, I agreed softly. It's not. Because this wasn't revenge. It was correction. For the first time in my life, I wasn't defending my right to exist in that family. I was asserting it. And as I stood there, holding the truth in my hands while the chandeliers shimmered overhead and 40 people watched in stunned silence, I realized something that steadied me completely. Patricia had built her power on my silence, and I was done being quiet. When I said the estate wasn't the most important thing my grandmother left me, the room shifted again. The air felt thinner, charged, like the moment before lightning strikes. I could see it in Patricia's face, she knew. She didn't know exactly what I was about to say, but she knew the ground beneath her was unstable. I unfolded Grandma Grace's handwritten letter fully this time. The paper trembled slightly in my hands, but my voice did not. My grandmother wrote this for me, I said quietly, because she knew there were truths this family buried a long time ago. Patricia shook her head almost imperceptibly, as if denial could stop the next sentence from forming. I began to read. My dearest Myra, if you are reading this, then I am no longer here to protect you. There are things I should have told you sooner, and for that I am sorry. The room remained completely silent. Even the servers had retreated. You are not a stranger adopted by chance, I continued. You are my blood. My real blood. The words seemed to echo against the high ceilings. I lifted my eyes from the letter and looked directly at Patricia. You are my granddaughter, the daughter of Marcus, my firstborn son. The effect was immediate and explosive. Marcus? Someone whispered loudly. He had a brother, another voice said. Jenna's phone lowered fully now. Her face had lost its color. My father went rigid. Patricia's fingers tightened around the podium behind her like she needed something solid to keep from falling. Aunt Helen stood slowly, her voice steady, but heavy with memory. Marcus was Richard's older brother. All eyes turned toward her. He struggled, she continued carefully. He made mistakes, but he was family. And when he died, he left behind a 2-year-old daughter. I swallowed hard. May. The room buzzed with overlapping whispers. That's not, Patricia began, but her voice faltered. I held up the letter again. My grandmother asked Richard to take me in, I said softly. Not as a charity case, not as a financial opportunity, but because I was already family. My father's eyes were wet now. He didn't try to hide it. You knew, I said to Patricia, not accusingly, not angrily, just stating a fact. She didn't answer. She didn't have to. Her silence was confirmation enough. For 30 years, I had carried the quiet weight of being other, of being introduced with a pause, of watching my sister move through that house with effortless belonging while I measured my steps. 30 years of believing I had been chosen out of kindness, when in reality, I had been taken in because I was already blood. You made me feel like I didn't belong, I said, my voice steady despite the emotion rising in my chest. When I had every right to be there. Patricia's composure cracked further. You don't understand what that time was like, she snapped, her voice sharp with something that sounded almost defensive. Marcus brought shame to this family. He was unstable, addicted. Your grandmother romanticized him. Aunt Helen's expression hardened. He was hurting, she corrected quietly. There's a difference. The room felt split between shock and discomfort. Decades of silence were unraveling in real time. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. For 30 years, I continued, you told me I was lucky, that I should be grateful, that I had been saved. I paused. But I wasn't saved. I looked at my father. I was hidden. His shoulders slumped, as if the weight of that word finally settled fully on him. There's more, I said gently, reaching back into the envelope. Patricia's head snapped toward my hand. Inside was the smaller sealed packet, the one labeled only open when absolutely necessary. I hadn't opened it yet, not even at home. I had waited. And as I stood there, under the chandeliers, in front of 40 witnesses and a family that had shaped my identity through omission, I knew this was necessary. My grandmother left one more thing, I said quietly. She told me to open this when I truly needed it. Patricia stepped forward quickly. Myra, don't. We can talk about this privately. Privately. The word almost made me smile. Like tonight? I asked softly. Like the microphone? She froze. I broke the seal. The paper inside unfolded into 2 documents and a photograph. The first was a dated legal affidavit confirming my paternity, Marcus Anderson listed clearly as my biological father. The second was a written statement from my grandmother, detailing the circumstances of Marcus's death and the family's decision to erase his name from conversation. And then there was the photograph. A young man, paint on his hands, a crooked smile, eyes that looked achingly familiar, holding a toddler with dark hair and wide eyes. Me. The resemblance was undeniable. I held the photo up. That's my father, I said quietly. The room absorbed the image. He loved you, Aunt Helen whispered, tears streaming down her face. He talked about you constantly. My throat tightened. For the first time in my life, I wasn't imagining what he looked like. I wasn't filling in blanks with guesswork. I was seeing him. And I saw myself. Patricia's voice came out brittle. This doesn't change anything about the will. Blood doesn't. It changes everything, I said calmly. Because it did. The narrative she had built that I was an outsider brought in for convenience collapsed completely under the weight of documented truth. My father stepped forward then, slowly. She's my brother's daughter, he said, his voice breaking. She always has been. The admission cost him something. I could see it. But I let you treat her like she was temporary, he said to Patricia. And I said nothing. Silence fell heavy again. Jenna looked between us all like she was watching a version of history she had never been told. I thought, she started, then stopped. I thought we adopted you because that's the story you were given, I said gently. The room no longer felt like a courtroom. It felt like excavation. Decades of buried truth unearthed in one evening. Patricia looked around at the faces that had once mirrored her confidence. Now they reflected doubt. "This is ridiculous," she muttered weakly. "You're twisting everything." "No," I said softly. "I'm untwisting it." And as I stood there, holding proof of who I was, not just legally, but historically, I felt something inside me shift permanently. For years, I had tried to earn my place. Tonight, I wasn't asking for it anymore. I was reclaiming it. And in that moment, with my father weeping quietly, Aunt Helen steady beside me, and 40 witnesses to the unraveling of a carefully curated lie, I understood something profound. The truth doesn't just expose people, it restores you. And I was finally whole. For a few seconds after I finished speaking, no one moved. The chandeliers hummed softly above us, the only sound in a room that had just watched 30 years of silence collapse in less than 10 minutes. I still held the photograph of my father in one hand, the affidavit in the other. My pulse was steady now. Not because I wasn't emotional, but because the fear had finally burned off. Patricia was the first to break the stillness. "This is absurd," she said, though her voice lacked its earlier authority. "Even if Marcus was your biological father, that doesn't change the fact that we raised you, that we provided for you, that you controlled the narrative." I interrupted gently. I wasn't angry. I was clear. There's a difference. She looked at the guests, searching for someone, anyone, to reaffirm her version of events. No one met her eyes. Not Mrs. Patterson from the charity board. Not Mr. Henderson, who had known my grandmother for decades. Not even Jenna, whose phone was now completely lowered at her side. Patricia's power had always depended on audience alignment, on subtle nods, on social reinforcement. Tonight, the audience had shifted. "You humiliated me," I continued quietly. "In front of 40 people. You called me a tax benefit." A visible ripple of discomfort moved through the room. Saying it out loud again stripped it of any remaining polish. "You thought," I said, meeting her gaze directly, "that if you framed me as temporary, as an outsider, as something you graciously took in, it would be easier to contest the will." Her face went pale. "You have no proof of that," she snapped. I held up the envelope again. "My grandmother anticipated that possibility," I replied calmly. "That's why everything was documented properly, witnessed, recorded, stored." Aunt Helen stepped forward, her presence quiet but unshakable. Grace wasn't confused. She wasn't manipulated. She made her decision years ago. Patricia's composure began to unravel in visible threads. "This isn't over," she said again, but now it sounded less like a threat and more like disbelief. "No," I agreed softly. "It isn't. But it's not going to unfold the way you planned." I lowered the photograph and carefully placed it back into the envelope, followed by the documents. I didn't rush. I didn't slam anything down. There was no need for drama. The drama had already played out. "I'm not here to destroy anyone," I said, turning slightly so the room could hear me clearly. "I'm not here to throw anyone out of their home tonight." That seemed to surprise Patricia. "I didn't come to my birthday expecting a war," I continued. "I came because I thought maybe you were finally trying." The admission hung in the air longer than the legal statements had. For a brief moment, I saw something flicker across Patricia's face that wasn't anger. It wasn't fear either. It was something closer to shame. But shame requires acknowledgement. And Patricia had never been very good at that. "You embarrassed yourself," she said sharply, grasping for control one last time. "This entire display." "No," I said quietly. "You did that." The words weren't cruel. They were factual. My father stepped forward then, and his voice shook when he spoke. "Myra is my niece," he said. "She always has been." The simplicity of it felt heavier than the legal language had. "I should have protected her," he added, barely above a whisper. Patricia looked at him as if she didn't recognize him. "You're choosing her over your wife?" she demanded. He swallowed hard. "I'm choosing the truth." That was the moment I knew it was over. Not because of the estate. Not because of the affidavit. But because the dynamic had shifted in a way that couldn't be reversed. Patricia looked around one last time, scanning the room for allegiance, for support, for anyone willing to validate her narrative. She found none. The silence she had once used as a weapon now pressed against her. Her heels clicked sharply against the marble floor as she stepped back from the podium. The sound echoed too loudly in the quiet room. "This isn't finished," she muttered again, but her voice lacked direction. Then she turned and walked toward the exit. At first, it was measured, controlled. But halfway across the room, the pace changed. Faster, less composed. The heavy restaurant door opened, then closed with a dull, final thud. Patricia had left her own party. Jenna stood frozen for a moment, mascara slightly smudged beneath her eyes. She looked at me, then at our father, then toward the door. "I didn't know," she said softly. It wasn't a defense. It wasn't an apology. It was confusion. "I know," I replied gently. After a second, she picked up her bag and followed our mother out. And just like that, the storm passed. The room exhaled collectively. Conversations resumed slowly, cautiously. Someone cleared their throat. A glass clinked lightly. I stood there, clutch in hand, feeling an unfamiliar sensation settle into my chest. Relief. Not triumph. Not revenge. Relief. Aunt Helen wrapped her arms around me tightly. "She would be proud," she whispered. "Your grandmother." For the first time that night, my composure cracked. Tears welled up, not from humiliation, not from anger, but from release. 30 years of carrying a question I never knew how to ask. 30 years of shrinking in rooms that now felt too small for me. And suddenly, I wasn't shrinking anymore. My father approached slowly. His eyes were red. "I don't know how to fix this," he admitted, "but I am so sorry." "You can't fix 30 years in one night," I said honestly. "But you spoke. That matters." He nodded, swallowing hard. "I loved your brother," I added quietly. "I deserved to know him." He closed his eyes briefly. "You're right." Around us, guests began approaching, hesitant at first, then more confident. Mrs. Patterson squeezed my hand. "Grace talked about you constantly," she said. "She adored you." Mr. Henderson gave me a firm nod. "That took courage," he said. Lucas appeared at my side with 2 glasses of champagne. "Still want to blow out candles?" he asked softly. I laughed through tears. "Yes," I said. "I think I do." Someone began humming, "Happy Birthday," uncertain at first. Then another voice joined, and another. 40 voices, once witnesses to humiliation, now witnesses to something else entirely. Not victory. Restoration. As I blew out the candles, I didn't make a wish. I didn't need to, because for the first time in my life, I understood something that changed everything. Belonging isn't granted by volume or by performance. It isn't assigned by whoever holds the microphone. It's rooted in truth. And no matter how carefully someone tries to rewrite your story, the truth waits. That night, I walked out of the Sterling not as the girl who had been introduced with a pause, not as the daughter defined by a footnote, not as a tax benefit. I walked out as Marcus's daughter, Grace's granddaughter, and someone who would never again allow her worth to be negotiated in public. The estate would become public knowledge in 2 weeks. Lawyers would get involved, conversations would continue, boundaries would be drawn. But the most important shift had already happened. Patricia tried to erase me in front of 40 people. Instead, she gave me the stage to reclaim myself, and that, in the end, was the only inheritance that truly mattered. If there's one thing this story proves, it's that humiliation only works when you accept the version of yourself someone else creates. My mother tried to define me in one sentence: a tax benefit. She thought that if she said it loudly enough, in front of enough people, it would become truth. But the most powerful moments in life don't happen when someone exposes you. They happen when you expose what's been hidden. This wasn't just a story about inheritance. It was about identity, about what happens when the narrative you've lived inside for years suddenly cracks open, about finding out that the thing you were taught to be ashamed of was never your shame to carry. If you've ever felt like an outsider in your own family, if you've ever had to find your voice in a room that preferred your silence, I hope this story reminded you of something important. You don't need permission to belong. If this resonated with you, if you want more stories about truth, resilience, and reclaiming your place, subscribe to Revenge Tale Network. Stay with us. Your story matters too.